Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Welcome, everybody. Today's episode of Big Blend Radio's Writers Wednesday show with Books Forward shines the spotlight on two writers. One is Rachel Field and one is Robin Clifford Wood, who stayed in Rachel's house and actually goes there in the summertime. And she wrote a biography on Rachel Field, and also it's really kind of a memoir, too. It's kind of this hybrid, and it's very unique to do that. And she's here on the show today to talk all about Rachel and what it's like to kind of inhabit the author's space. And she's an author. This is her debut book, but she's also written numerous articles. She's speaking events on Rachel Field. And I think this is really special about carrying the torch of these amazing creative souls of our past, whether they're an artist, a musician, a writer, a poet. And sometimes, it's like Clementine Paddleford. Nancy, remember how I got all into her? She was America's first foodie, like food journalist. And she ended up being flown around. She wrote for the New York Times and all these different, outlets. And she was the first, before Anthony Bourdain and all of that, but she really did it. And she went around America documenting. She would sit down with farmers and all these different people getting what did America eat. And so we could get an idea. And this was way back when. And there was two ladies who turned around and wrote her book. And I think that was something special. And I think that's what's so special about Robin, what she's done, because oftentimes, especially if they're women, these creative souls get forgotten about. So the book is out now. We're actually recording. It's winter in Asheville, North Carolina. It's winter where Robin is in Maine. But her book is out officially May 4th, 2021. And today we are airing this on May 5th. So welcome, Robin. How are you?
I am doing great. It's wonderful to be here.
Hey, this is cool what you're doing. Nancy and I both really, appreciate you taking this time for Rachel, but it seems that you're kind of destined to do this, to write about her.
It felt like that to me, but it took me a long time to get the message.
Well, is there any possibility, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to research your family history, do you think there's a possibility that you might be related in some way?
It's conceivable, but I don't think so, because I looked pretty far back. In fact, the Field family, Rachel was descended from quite an illustrious family. The generation, two generations back from her, there was this couple who had 12 children, or some ridiculous number of children, and so many of there were Supreme Court justices and people who were major movers and shakers in politics and engineering. One of the uncles was he was the guy who finally first laid the cable that allowed us to send cables across the ocean, and so she one of the sources of her insecurities as a child, I think, was that she felt like she grew up amidst these huge expectations, and she felt like she was no good relative to all that Field family hoopla.
Huh. Wow.
Do you think does she go back to England ancestry, like England with her heritage?
I think that's probably right. I think it's probably English for the most part, but that I don't have a recollection specifically of them tracing it back. But certainly, that I think that's probably, I think it's all English. That's my impression. English, maybe Scottish, that whole general British Isles region.
I asked that because it just, even the last name Field, it sounds very British. Yeah, English to me. And then we have an English historian that looks up people's heritage for us on our show. So I'm going to ask Glenn.
Oh.
Yeah, and he takes people on their family history tours in England and Norfolk. So I'm going to ask him because it just sounds like this. It's really neat that the book is out through She Writes Press, too. And I encourage everyone to go to your website, robincliffordwood.com, and that's Robin, Robin. so you decided to write this book, but you first knew about her, Rachel Field, and everyone. She's a National Book Award winning novelist, a Newbery Medal winning children's writer, a poet, a playwright, and was also a Hollywood success. And so we're talking about early in the 20th century. So here she was, really successful, and then she dies at the young age of 47. That's my age this year. I'm not there yet, but I mean, I'm like, I don't want to go now. I'm busy. But so here she was, all of these amazing things. So when did you first hear about her?
Well, believe it or not, I really wasn't familiar with Rachel Field before I first went to Sutton Island, which I discovered through my then boyfriend, now husband, whose family had been going to Sutton Island for many years. And Rachel Field was a bit of a personage even then, well into the 90s. Well, even today in the Down East Maine region, she's still somewhat of a known name, though fading from view. But I had heard of she had this one particular poem that was very familiar to me, and a lot of her poems were anthologized. So I think as I started hearing about her, things came familiar. But one of her poems is called "If Once You Have Slept on an Island, You'll Never Be Quite the Same," and that's how it begins, and it's quite beautiful. And one of the coolest things about that is that once I slept on her island, I was never quite the same. And she wrote that poem in response to what it did for her, because she was not a Mainer by birth, but she called Maine her roots and background. Once she set foot in Maine, she felt like she sprang roots into the soil on her very first visit when she was 15 years old. And so that was something I shared with her, was that sense of deep kind of soul connection once we spent time on this very rugged, rocky, pointed, spruce-topped island right off the coast of Mount Desert Island, which is where Acadia National Park is.
Cool. We want to go there.
Yeah.
No. So you ended up, here it is, owning her house. But it's wild. When we lived in Mexico for a little while and rented this house that was known as the House of the Dead Seal. And we got in there, and the house, it was an artist who had it, and she had left. And so we're dealing with these realtors on it and everything. And there was like a dead seal thingy in the front, and we were right on the beach. We were on this little spit. And they had the dead seal skull out there, and on the inside it was painted like you're underwater when you walk into the living room. And when we got there, there was this little bed area, and it had all these books, including this artist's diary, which of course, that was it. I'm in that little area, I can't even say, it's like a little nook with a cushion on it. And I'm like, that's it. I'm reading this woman's story, and it was crazy. And she mentioned Jim Morrison, and the House of the Dead Seal comes out in Jim Morrison from the Doors, one of his songs. And it's like, no way. Our band used to cover it. I'm like, this is crazy. And I got all into who was this woman, this artist in, living alone in Mexico and doing, it was just a weird, funky house, and it was so cool. And then you start, she had all these, books and, really like old botany books, and I got all into who this woman was, and I don't know who she is, but it was crazy because she was talking about all the people she met on the, not on the island, but on the beach. So I kind of can understand what it's like going into another author's space. But when you went in there, you're around her stuff like that too. It's not like it's here.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And So keep in mind, I had actually been going to this island, to my husband's family house for 14 years before I set foot into the field house, which is how it was known. That was a testament to Rachel's local fame, that her old house was known as the field house. And we found out it was for sale, and we were in no position to contemplate buying a second house at that point, but we were just fantasizing and walked in there, and I just remember feeling heart flutters when I walked through the door. And no one had lived in this place for years. It was kind of falling to pieces. There were holes in the deck, and the roof was leaky. But Rachel Field wasn't the only creative soul to live in that space. One of the first inhabitants had written a journal that there's copies of circulating around that island. And then Saturday Evening Post illustrator and his wife, who was another famous poet in her day, Hortense Flexner, they spent many, many summers in that house doing their work. And a Oscar-winning composer spent a summer in the back studio where Rachel used to write, composing his music on an old upright piano.
Oh, so very cool.
There's lots of creative vibes in the space, and I feel like I felt that when I went into the and I at that point I knew about Rachel Field, sort of, but that's when I started getting curious and started reading more of her stuff. And it was another 14 years before I actually got serious about researching her very pointedly to write about her. So it was a long process. But yes, her you talked about that diary on the shelf, and I don't know if you've heard of Wanamaker's diaries. It was an old catalog that had day logs with spaces you could record the happenings of the day. And there's a 1928 Wanamaker's diary with entries from Rachel's mother.
Wow.
And it talks about, Rachel and Lyle, all devotion. Rachel and Lyle did the marketing today. And that was one of my biggest mysteries as I got into digging up her life, was who is this Lyle guy? Because she married a guy named Arthur. And it took me years to find out.
So she was actually a person, or not maybe a pet?
No, she did have Scotty dog pets all the time. They were like her little pointy-eared familiar. She loved Scotty dogs. No, cool. Lyle, so here's the story. I looked for Lyle for a very long time, and this project sort of rose and fell in my attentions, and sometimes I'd put it away for months and maybe say, oh, never mind, it's not going anywhere. And then it kept getting thrown back in my path. I'd get a call from some library I'd visited that said, oh, someone's donating their Rachel Field collection, and can we give him your contact information? And that guy turned out to be a great mentor for me. He was a biographer himself, and his godmother was one of Rachel's closest friends and confidants. And then another time someone, again, when I had put the project away, someone called me and to ask about Rachel Field copyrights, or they asked me to read Rachel Field poems on a Poetry Day celebration around the state of Maine. So it kept on. If my fanciful brain takes over, I say, Rachel kept on trying to contact me and keep me focused on this project over time.
Oh, cool, very cool.
It's crazy because it's your house. That's just, it's this whole, that's why I said at the very beginning of our conversation, it's just like you were destined to do this. And do you get this familiarity as you get to know her? Do you kind of like start to share a brain in a way, like as you're writing?
I think so. And when I had a few chapters done, my mother was still living, and was an avid reader, and I shared a bunch of Rachel Field's work with her. And so she had become familiar with Rachel Field stuff. And when she read my first few chapters, she said, Robin, it's so interesting that I feel like you are writing in the rhythms of Rachel Field's writing. It feels like you've kind of adopted that tone in your own writing. I thought that was really striking.
Cool.
So, she definitely wielded a great influence over me, even though she was, the age of my grandmother's, a little older, and of course we never met because she died decades before I was born.
Maybe she's a ghost.
Yeah.
Well, I've wondered if it might be possible, because when she died very tragically and suddenly, and it was not even really advertised. It said in the papers things like she died of pneumonia after a hospitalization, and and it was and no, it was very abrupt, and it actually ended up having, I don't want to give too much away, but the circumstances surrounding her death were profoundly heartbreaking.
Wow.
And quite sudden and unexpected. So I think one of the reasons that she didn't linger as longer than she might have is that her death was so tragic, and it was followed by more tragedy in the family she left behind, and so I think it was too painful for people to keep for people who loved her, of which there were many, to keep bringing up her story, because it just had too much sorrow in it. And Rachel, she was the epitome of not sorrowful. She was described as a ray of sunshine, as like flowers coming in from the country. She was just a delightful person. She was very humble. She had vulnerabilities and insecurities because she was very not a traditionally beautiful woman. She was very large in both in height and girth, and had apparently very I've seen photos. She described heavy masculine features like her father, and she was always very insecure about her not only her appearance, but she couldn't read until she was 10, and had and she had this Fields family legacy looming over her that made her feel worthless, and so there were a lot of things like that reached my heart also about her, because we all have vulnerabilities and insecurities, and I felt like I could resonate with a lot of hers.
Wow.
That's interesting too, because I think that's what makes good art. So, sometimes everybody's different in every situation, so it won't work for somebody else, right? But that is probably where her writing comes in, because you have to see things in a different light. Otherwise, you're going to keep beating yourself up. You know what I mean? Or, you have to perspectives all the time. And what I wanted to know is about being out on an island and you being there, and here she's writing. There's obviously, like you're saying in her poem, that, once you're there, it's like, we have that saying of, we lived in Kenya, and if you go to Kenya, once you get that red dirt under your fingernails, you're going back. You're never the same, and it's really true.
That's cool.
So it's and I think it's the same way. What about the island nature? Because islands can be really busy and packed with people, or is it an island where there's more nature and more solitary kind of moments where you can have that reflection time?
It's absolutely the second type. It's a tiny island. It's 1 mile long and a half mile wide.
Oh,
and
wow.
There's only
it's
about,
tiny.
I think there's only maybe 22 houses scattered around the island. There are no roads.
Wow.
So that's one of the reasons people leave their belongings behind, is that when you sell the house, in order to get stuff off, you literally have to lug it, by hand or in wheelbarrows, or get strong people to carry stuff down to the rocks on the beach for barges to pick them up. I mean, it's a big ordeal. So all the furniture that we're sitting in is the same tables and chairs that Rachel Field sat in, and the people even before her sat in when they were there. Lots of her books are there. There's kitchen mixing bowls that are probably 100 years old, and like a pegboard grocery list with things like lamp black and lard and alum and stuff like that on it.
Oh my gosh!
It's very you really feel like you're stepping into the past. But
it's like a museum.
Yes.
Yeah,
it is. It is a
living
like
one, though. A living museum where, you keep you've really kept the torch going forward, not just for her, for all the other people in the house. And then at the same time, you've got to be really thankful that they made good furniture back then.
There's also plenty of caned chairs with ripped seats up in the attic that someday, they're in the someday we'll fix this, pile. Yeah.
Oh, wow. We lived on an island, Guernsey, that's between England and France for a short time.
My gosh.
Yeah, my mother married a gentleman that came from there. And when we left Africa, we went there for a couple of weeks or so, a couple of months maybe. And it was a very odd place. I have to say, the downtown was really very busy. At least I don't know if you remember how many people lived there, way more than 20. It was very busy, but the driving was kind of crazy. Nobody seemed to care what side of the road they were on. And on the outside, the nature part was really quite beautiful, but it was 5 miles by 9 miles wide, and we found it really, really hard to stay somewhere that small, like on a permanent basis. We were like, we've seen it now after a day or two. We've seen it. I mean,
I think it definitely takes a particular mentality to enjoy island living. And there are two other, Sutton Island is one of 5 cranberry islands.
Okay.
And two of the other cranberries do have year-round populations on them. And I know people who have tried living there full-time and too isolated and too lonely in the winter, but there's other people who absolutely adore it, and when they go off island, they can't wait to get back. I mean, I think it attracts introverts and and people who like things quiet and simple, and so there's definitely that. But Sutton is all summer people. There's no year-rounders on Sutton Island.
Okay.
I think I'd dig it now. Like, we're on the road full time, but there's that mode of like, if we're going to settle down, then I would want a place that's just away, because I don't know, there is something about there is a romanticism to it, I think, that draws you to those, it's like, you can, I don't know, I always see myself as an old lady on like a rocky beach. Like, when we were talking about Guernsey, you go out on the edges on the nature side, and there's a lot of cows. They've got Jersey cows and everything out there.
And Guernsey,
but there were the puffin birds, and just these really, the rocky beaches like Oregon.
It's cool.
And that's the only way I can really see, I can look at pictures, but there's a feeling to that where it's desolate, but there's drama. Like there's like super big drama if you open your eyes to it.
That is an excellent way of putting it. I totally agree with you. And the power of the ocean and the tumbling rocks as the tide ebbs and flows, and the windstorms that really can wreak havoc out there there's a lot of sort of being in the midst of elemental forces that is quite stirring. So, and I think that's a big draw. And of course, in Rachel's time, it was much more of an ordeal to get there. She had friends with boats that helped her get there. But even her home was in New York City most of her adult life, the rest of the year, and it was cars, trains, boats, all kinds of. It was a long time before you could even drive all the way to the harbor in a car to get out there. So and they didn't even have electricity, I think, till 1935 or something like that. So when she first went, it was even more rustic. But we actually have high-speed internet out there now. So it's, so a lot of those things do change. Although we do try to hang on to keeping things. We have no TV and raising kids there is the best because they find stuff to do. They build fairy houses out of moss and mushrooms in the woods, and they and they make up games. They put on plays in the woods, and
awesome.
It's like heaven for dogs and children for sure.
I know the island that we stayed on, there was a German hospital from World War II. Underground hospital that we went to look at it, and that was really creepy. I mean, it's all, the walls were dripping with water, and it was like a big cave, and there are hospital beds here and there, and That was like, dude.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, it was creepy. Well, the
It was
Nazis
creepy.
occupied the island, and my step grandfather was part of that, and they took their radios away, but he knew how to make radios, and he was a gardener for them, and it's kind of it's a crazy thing, but that island life of
It's a story there.
it's a definite story, but that moss and those caves and those
Ugh.
sea caves. So I can, as kids, I think kids need this now, places like that, and it's got to be inspirational as a writer, especially with poetry. When you're talking about like the rhythm of the ocean and the waves, that's got to help in writing in some way.
It definitely does, and I love to get out there and just be sitting in that space to work in the summertime. It's a great place to be. But I also find, and Rachel wrote about this too, that sometimes you get distracted by just walking around the shoreline or walking through these incredible, like 2-foot deep moss carpeted forests under the spruce trees. It's quite stunning.
Wow.
And I think you can get lulled into the I don't know, natural rhythms of the island, and sometimes when you write, you pull yourself out of your surroundings and into your mind, and so it can kind of go both ways. The other thing is having one of the things that I think Rachel Field and I had things that we shared, but we pointedly did not have the same experience as one of the reasons that I think I got so compelled to write this story was because a life that I was leading that I didn't feel quite happy with. And I think women finding empowerment in sisterhood with each other is one of the big points that I tried to make in this book, because Rachel longed for children forever. And didn't marry till she was 40, had struggled with infertility issues, and finally did adopt a child who was only 2 when she died. And I always envied her work ethic and all of her success as a writer, because I wanted to be a writer when I was 8 years old. And I didn't expect to love motherhood as much as I did, but I had these 4 children, and I absolutely loved motherhood as an occupation, and I did that pretty much full time for 25 years. But I also at the same time felt like I'd sold out somehow, that I never did the writing thing. And in the process of working on Rachel's story, I recognized that how much she would have adored being able to have children and bring them to Sutton Island. And so in a way, I felt like bringing children into her house must have, that somehow was completing an incompletion from her life. But she also inspired me to say it's not too late. You could still follow this path. Just be patient. You can move on. And in fact, I used to say to people in my teens and 20s, I always wanted to write a book. And I said, maybe I'll publish a book when I'm 60. And here I am, 60 years old, when my first book comes out.
I think she's still in the house, and she's been tapping you on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, come on."
Yeah,
I honestly feel that way sometimes.
Yeah,
Nancy, it really does feel like that.
Yeah, I think that could very well be true, because I think it takes so much work to write these kind of books. It really does. I wanted to write a historic novel, and I still want to write about Kenya. And I started it, and then I stopped, and then I did that, and then I stopped, and that's so many years ago, but it's still in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
That's still there.
I mean, you should. It sounds like an incredible life you guys have had, and what you've seen of the world is really exciting sounding.
It has been, man. It's a joy. It's crazy. We're a little crazy, because it's just like you keep going, but it's like I think there's these moments where writing something, obviously with you, you've got the biography and then this memoir side where you've got your stories and pathways have merged. And I think that's something interesting in life, because I think at the end of the day, we all end up, if we're open to it, doing what we said when we were kids, or what we're supposed to do. And it really sounds like this is just one of those incredible stories on top of an incredible story, right? Of you doing this and just even, I just find it, you've got to go to a psychic and find out what's going on, man.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
That's really, maybe I should. My skeptic makes me hesitate, but I know that what I feel intuitively is that there's no question that something's going on. I want to finish something quickly about this whole Lyle, the mysterious Lyle, because there was this summer when my youngest daughter had just transferred to Tulane University down in New Orleans. And I was in 2 weeks, we were about to leave on this long road trip, and I suddenly had some open space to mess around with. And so I hadn't looked at my Rachel Field stuff in months, but I pulled it out again, and I found the name. When Rachel was in New York, she hung out with a lot of other writers, and this name Lyle Saxon came up. And I said, I wonder if Lyle Saxon could be that, Rachel and Lyle all devotion person from the diary on the island. And so, of course, in the age of the internet, I never could have written this book, by the way, without the internet. It just helped me connect so easily. And I called her 2 biographers who'd written about Lyle Saxon, and the second one gasped when I told her who I was and what my circumstance was. She said, I can't believe you live in Rachel Field's house. She said, I almost wrote a biography of Rachel Field because I've seen her incredible letters, and I'm sure she was in love with Lyle. And I said, oh, my gosh. And she said, they're the most mind-blowing letters I've ever read, and you've got to see them. And I said, well, where are they? Where's this collection? And she said, they're in the archive at Tulane University. And so, and there I was, 2 weeks from driving, ever many thousands of miles from Maine to New Orleans to Tulane University. So, these collections of Rachel's letters just always happened to fall right where I was going to be anyway.
See, she's tapping you on the shoulder, and she's
it really happened time and again. It just kind of gave me shivers. That's
you're giving me goosebumps.
Yeah,
I know.
When I gave talks about her, I resisted the idea of having myself enter the book at all for a long, long time, because I said, this is Rachel's story. I want to write about Rachel's life. But first of all, a lot of publishers said, she's not known enough, no one's going to care. No one will be interested. Although, I still think her life is worth, even her life by itself is quite stunning and engaging. But people really lit up and sat forward in their seats when I started talking about the connections between her and me, and so I thought, how am I going to do this without taking away from Rachel's story? And at a writers' conference one summer, the writing prompt said, write a letter to someone who will never read it. And I just impulsively wrote a letter to Rachel Field.
Cool.
And it felt so wonderful to speak directly to her, and this, like, the light went on. I said, oh my gosh, I think this is how this is going to work. So I ended up writing letters that precede each chapter in the book, and that kind of threads my story of how she changed my life in the midst of the main book, which is about Rachel herself.
This is crazy. Like, I'm serious. But I love that, too, that it was a writing exercise, too. So
I think you should research your family history. I bet you there's a connection somewhere.
Yeah. I'm calling Glenn.
Maybe.
I'm calling Glenn.
Yeah, let's ask Glenn.
I know. Glenn, I'm serious. Glenn Burroughs, he really, it's interesting, as we travel the country, we're documenting literary landmarks. I know we talked about this before the recording today, and we're doing it with Books Forward, as part of our Love Your Parks tour, documenting literary landmarks. So when we get to Maine, we so have to come see you. This has to be part of it. This is just such an incredible story. But Helen Hunt Jackson, we were in Colorado Springs going to the Garden of the Gods, which is this, beautiful red rock formations. It's, and it was packed. It was for my birthday, which is over Labor Day weekend sometimes. And it was just really, really packed. and we wanted to have our picnic and our little wine, and we couldn't. So then we're like, okay, we had a good hike around and everything, and we went, let's go find another park. And we were going to one park when we got lost and ended up at another park, which was North Cheyenne Canyon Park. Something like that. Anyway, we ended up in this beautiful forest area, totally lost, didn't know what we were doing, had our little picnic. It was magic. It was pure magic. And then we went to move the car out, and there was this little visitor center and this waterfall. We're like, huh. Well, it was dedicated to Helen Hunt Jackson. And I'm going, I know this name. What is it about this name? Well, it turns out it's the author who wrote Ramona. Well, we used to live in Julian in San Diego, which is up in the mountains, and down the street is the town Ramona. And it's this pageant that they put up. Hemet and Ramona's right there. And it's all about, she stood up for, Native American rights. This woman is amazing what she did. She did so many things. And apparently, now check this out, her husband had something to do with the Garden of Gods being formed. It's like all this, like settling Colorado Springs and all. I mean, the history is out of, like incredible. And so where we were is where she was originally buried. And I didn't know all this until we left, And so, and they had to move her burial site because of the, too many people. And anyway, she's still buried in Colorado Springs. Anyway, so I look it up. I'm like, Helen Hunt Jackson sounds British. So I emailed Glenn, and Glenn is like, oh, let me dig into this. Turns out her family lived in the village next to him, and they go to the same church. So he's been going to the same church as Helen Hunt Jackson's family all these years. That's how close it is.
Oh, my gosh.
Isn't that crazy?
Isn't it crazy? And the same thing happened. He was on a show with us with another lady from a tiny town in Kentucky, Springfield. And we were all on a show talking, and she's like, well, this is where Abraham Lincoln's, parents met, fell in love, and got married. And the marriage certificate's in this town, and we went there. And he turns around, well, Abraham Lincoln's ancestry comes from the village next to him in Swanton Morley. And so they're going to do the sister city program and all of this stuff. We are so all connected. And I think it's these stories that remind us, and maybe we'll all be nicer to each other when we hear stories like this.
Wasn't Tom Hanks related to Abraham Lincoln's mother?
Yes, Nancy Hanks, yes.
Oh, that's very cool.
Isn't
Mary
that
Todd,
really funny?
Excuse me. Why did I say Nancy? Mary Todd Hanks. I might have it wrong. Yeah. Mary Todd Hanks. Yeah.
Yeah, Mary Todd Lincoln.
That's on her side. So it's just this whole Charlotte's Web of how we're all tied somewhere. But and even interesting on the Helen Hunt Jackson. We had just come back from San Juan Bautista in California, where she went, and it's a very historic. It's like the crossroads of California history happens in this historic. It's known as the City of History, even though it's a village. And the state park itself has a old hotel. One of the ladies from the Donner Party lived there. I mean, it's crazy the history in this town. It's where Vertigo was filmed. Anyway, so we're there, and I'm reading up about her, and lo and behold, she tried it. And I even have photos of this historic house, the Castro Bean House. At the time was an Irish family living there, and she wanted to rent a room so she could write Ramona because of all the Native American heritage that was going on there. And apparently the kid that opened the door was a real brat to her, so she couldn't stand kids. And so, she cared about kids, but she was like, that's it, I'm out of here. And so she left, but she was going to go and write her book there, and then she ended up in Hemet and doing Ramona there where we used to live. It's just weird. It's just those kind of things are like that. So we've got to put you and Rachel on our map. It has to happen. I'm inspired. We've got to do that.
Yes, and I'm very glad that you've asked me to focus on Rachel because I was a little sorry when She Writes Press, by the way, I will say is an absolutely spectacular institution, and they've given voice to so much great work, and I'm so grateful to them for taking a chance on me. But they were reluctant to have Rachel Field be in the title of the book, again, because she's not a household name by any stretch. And I love how things ended up because I'm happy with the title I ended up with, which is The Field House, because it really is the house that connected us. And the subtitle is A Writer's Life, lost and found on an island in Maine.
Cool.
And that is kind of what the story was. I mean, her life sort of disappeared, and I feel like I somehow was chosen to unearth it and bring it back to the light, because it's a life filled with light and sunniness and optimism, even in the face of hardship and heartbreak. And so it feels pretty good to be where I am now. It's sort of amazing that it's actually happening.
That's so cool.
And it's your first book. That's got to feel good.
Yay.
It's super good. It's really a thrill. It's very exciting.
I love this. I love it. And she, might have, it sounded like she was on her way to becoming a household name, And who knows, from this could get people interested in what she has done in the past, So, that's what I say about
a lot of
her
books are. Her books are. I love her writing. I love her poetry best, because it's just so. It's charming, and she has just these subtle insights into the human condition that appear in a lot of them. But it's all effused with recognizing beauty in the world, whether it's in a dog chasing fireflies, or a spider on its web, or the bell buoy clanging amongst the waves, or just or an old man mending a fishing net. She just sees the beauty of the world and evokes it so well. Some of her novels may be a bit dated, and I think the most important part of her life is really just the way she lived it, more than the fact that she, I wouldn't say, this is such important work that should be part of the literary canon. It's wonderful writing, but it's a inspiring life, and that's really that was my main draw to putting her back out there. I wanted her to be remembered not with sorrow anymore, but with the eye to the beauty in the world and of life that we all should be feeling.
She seems like she's got a lot of sense of place in her writing, and that's what you've done too with the house. I think in the island, that this is creating a sense of place where you can see the world, and that's important because again,
and the message of just remembering to look at it. Yeah, we get so busy. And we, for some reason, we have to go faster and faster and faster. I don't know what we're rushing to, but it's like, okay. And to actually take the time to look at a bug or notice a flower about to bloom and come back, like 3 hours later and to see that it actually did bloom, things like that.
Yes.
Take the time to appreciate what's in front of us,
And one of the cool
strong message.
And one of her books of poetry is called Taxis and Toadstools, because she wrote a lot of poetry about New York City in the 1930s too, and she saw beauty in the push cart men who sold pretzels and the hurdy-gurdy guy who played the accordion on the sidewalk, and so it was she found beauty everywhere, and I was a little sad when I read about how how in the end she let go of she sold her house on Sutton without too much sentimentality, because she had just moved to California and found so much beauty there. She just was so able to take what life handed her and just go with it. So she didn't cling to sorrow. She didn't cling to the past, and that's such a powerful message too. And it's part of what kept me going with this whole project, was her, that attitude.
I love that. This is such a cool story. Everyone, you've got to go get it because it's out now. May 5th is the date this is airing, and it comes out May 4th, so happy Pub Day in advance, even though it's happening now.
Thank you.
So everyone, again, it's called The Field House, and it's out now through She Writes Press, and the author is Robin Clifford Wood, and that's Robin with an I instead of a Y. And we're going to close with a song that I think we did the perfect song. It's called Silver Ghost, It's by James Saunders out in South Africa. You can go to jamessaundersmusician.com to keep up with him, and especially on Facebook. He releases a lot of his music through there. And Silver Ghost is actually, he's a big ocean guy, and he loves fishing. He loves to fish. And Silver Ghost is this fish that keeps coming, it haunts the waters. You see it, and then it's gone, and then all of a sudden you have it. And that kind of goes with your story, I believe, Robin, with you and Rachel. And you both have names that start with an R, too. How about that? I think
and Field and Wood are last names.
I know.
Yeah, see?
Lisa and Nancy, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you today. This is really great.
You too.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you when we get to wonderful the state of Maine. We'll see you there.
Absolutely. Definitely get in touch, and I'll take you out to the island.
Oh,
cool.
Awesome. We want to go.
You're on.
Yay. All right, here it is. Silver Ghost. Take care.
colliding with my dreams.